It was 6:47 in the morning when Detective Sergeant Jordan Hayes heard the first knock. Not a gentle knock. Not a neighbor asking to borrow sugar. This was the kind of pounding that makes your heart jump into your throat before your brain even processes what's happening. Jordan had been awake for about 20 minutes. Standing in her kitchen in an old FBI Academy t-shirt and pajama pants, warming her hands around a coffee mug. She was 42 years old, had spent nearly 2 decades in law enforcement, and currently worked as a field training instructor for the FBI. Her job was teaching police officers and federal agents how to do their jobs properly, how to stay safe, how to keep others safe, how to follow protocol. The pounding came again, harder this time. "Police, we have a warrant! Open the door now." Jordan's training kicked in automatically. She set down her coffee mug carefully, making sure not to spill it. Her mind was already running through possibilities. A warrant? For what? For who? She lived alone. She hadn't done anything wrong. There had to be some kind of mistake. She walked to her front door, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. Through the peephole she could see them. 6 officers, maybe more. All in tactical gear, vests, helmets, hands resting on their holstered weapons. They looked tense, ready for trouble. They looked exactly the way she'd trained hundreds of officers to look when executing a high-risk warrant. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't right. Something was very, very wrong. "I'm opening the door," Jordan called out, keeping her voice calm and clear. "I'm unarmed. I'm coming out with my hands visible." She'd taught this exact protocol dozens of times. When you're the subject of a police action, you announce your movements. You keep your hands where they can see them. You don't make sudden moves. You comply first, ask questions later. It keeps everyone safe. It prevents tragedies. But knowing the protocol and being on the receiving end of it are 2 completely different experiences. Jordan unlocked her door slowly, turning the deadbolt with deliberate care. She pulled the door open, stepping back with her hands raised at shoulder height, palms forward. "I'm FBI," she said clearly. "My credentials are on my kitchen counter. There's been some kind of mistake." The lead officer, a man in his mid-30s with sharp eyes and tension written across his face, barely seemed to hear her. "On the ground, now! Hands behind your head." Jordan's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her ears, but she stayed calm. She'd been in stressful situations before. She'd handled armed suspects, talked down violent offenders, survived active shooter training scenarios. But this was different. This was her home, her private space. And these officers streaming through her doorway weren't treating her like a fellow law enforcement professional. They were treating her like a threat. She got down on her knees, then laid herself flat on her living room carpet. The same carpet she'd vacuumed just yesterday. Her face pressed against the fibers, and she could smell the faint scent of the lavender carpet freshener she liked to use. Above her, heavy boots thundered past. She heard doors opening, drawers sliding, the metallic jingle of hangers in her closet. "Clear!" Someone shouted from her bedroom. "Clear!" came another voice from the bathroom. Jordan kept her breathing steady. In through the nose, out through the mouth. She'd taught stress management techniques to countless officers. When your adrenaline spikes, your brain stops thinking clearly, she told them. Control your breathing and you control your response. She was controlling her breathing. But she couldn't control the sick feeling spreading through her chest. She couldn't control the humiliation of lying face down in her own home, while strangers tore through her private belongings. She couldn't control the question screaming in her mind. How did this happen? An officer stood near her, his boot just inches from her face. She could see the tread pattern, the bit of mud caked in the grooves. She wondered absurdly if he'd wipe his feet on the way out, then almost laughed at the ridiculousness of the thought. Here she was, being raided by police, and she was worried about dirt on her carpet. "Who else is in the apartment?" the lead officer demanded. "Nobody," Jordan said, her voice slightly muffled by the carpet. "I live alone. My credentials are in the kitchen. Top drawer left of the sink. My badge and ID will show you who I am." But they weren't listening. Not really. They were following their training. Secure the scene first. Verify information second. Don't trust what the suspect tells you until you've confirmed it yourself. Jordan knew this because she'd taught this exact approach. She'd literally written part of the training manual these officers were probably following. From her position on the floor, she could see into her kitchen. She watched as an officer opened drawer after drawer, pulling out her neatly organized utensils. Her junk drawer with batteries and rubber bands. Her dish towels. Everything was being examined, moved, scattered. Her private life was being put on display by strangers. Minutes crawled by like hours. Jordan's shoulder was starting to ache from the awkward position of her arms. Her cheek itched where it pressed against the carpet. But she didn't move. She didn't complain. She barely breathed louder than necessary. She thought about the irony of this moment. Just last month she'd given a presentation on warrant execution errors. She'd shown slides of wrong address raids, cases where innocent people had been traumatized by police mistakes. She'd emphasized the importance of double-checking information, of verifying addresses, of making absolutely certain you had the right location before you went crashing through someone's door. And now here she was, living out one of those cautionary tales. Got something? An officer called out from her bedroom. Jordan's pulse spiked. Got something? There was nothing to get. She had nothing illegal in her apartment. Nothing even remotely suspicious. The lead officer moved toward the bedroom, his boots heavy on the floor. Jordan wanted to turn her head to see what they'd found, but she didn't dare move. Not yet. Not until they told her she could. She heard murmured conversation from the other room, too quiet to make out the words. Then footsteps returning. The lead officer crouched down near her head and she could finally see his face. He looked young, probably fresh off his probationary period. His eyes were hard, suspicious. You got any weapons in here? He asked. My service weapon is in a lockbox in my bedroom closet, top shelf, Jordan answered. The key is in my nightstand. I'm a federal agent. Everything is legal and properly stored. The officer's expression didn't change. He stood up and walked away. Jordan closed her eyes. All she could do was wait. Wait and hope that someone, eventually, would actually look at her credentials and realize they'd made a terrible mistake. The coffee she'd made was getting cold on the counter. She'd been looking forward to a quiet Saturday morning. Maybe some paperwork, a run in the park, lunch with a friend. Normal things. Simple things. Instead, she was face down on her carpet, surrounded by police officers who didn't believe she was one of them, waiting for someone to realize that this entire situation should never have happened in the first place. Jordan had been lying on her living room floor for what felt like forever when she finally heard the words she'd been waiting for. Sir, you need to see this. It was a younger officer's voice coming from the kitchen. There was something different in his tone now. Less aggressive. More uncertain. Jordan didn't move, didn't lift her head, but she felt a tiny spark of hope. The lead officer's boots appeared in her field of vision again. She heard paper rustling. Then silence. A long, heavy silence that seemed to stretch out forever. Get her up, the lead officer said quietly. Two officers helped Jordan to her feet. Her knees cracked as she stood and she brushed carpet fibers off her cheek. Standing in her own living room, surrounded by tactical officers, she'd never felt more exposed or vulnerable in her life. The lead officer was holding her credentials. Her FBI badge glinted in the morning light streaming through her window. His face had changed. The hard suspicion was gone, replaced by something that looked a lot like horror. Agent Hayes, he said, and his voice had completely transformed. He stopped, seeming unable to find the words. Jordan looked around her apartment. Her books were pulled off the shelves. Her couch cushions were moved. The contents of her hall closet were visible, coats and jackets pushed aside. In the kitchen, every drawer hung open. It looked like a tornado had blown through her organized, peaceful home. What apartment were you looking for? Jordan asked. Her voice was calm, professional even, though inside she was shaking. The lead officer looked down at the warrant in his hand. His jaw tightened. 4B. Jordan felt something cold settle in her stomach. This is apartment 4D. The officer closed his eyes. I know. 4B and 4D, 2 letters. One simple mistake. That's all it took to turn her quiet Saturday morning into this nightmare. But Jordan's mind was already working through the implications. She'd reviewed hundreds of warrants in her career. She'd taught courses on proper warrant execution, and she knew that mixing up an apartment number wasn't just a simple typo. It represented a fundamental failure in the verification process. Can I see the warrant? She asked. The lead officer hesitated, then handed it over. Jordan read through it quickly, her trained eyes catching every detail. The warrant was for a woman named Crystal Montgomery, wanted for involvement in a drug distribution ring. The physical description made Jordan's blood run cold. Black female, Late 30s to mid-40s. Residing at Riverside Apartments, that was it. No photo. No specific apartment number listed in the description section. Just the building name. No mention of identifying features, scars, tattoos, nothing. Just race, approximate age, and a building with over 200 units. Who prepared this warrant? Jordan asked. The lead officer shifted uncomfortably. Detective Williams from Narcotics. Jordan knew the name. She'd never met him personally, but she'd heard about him. He had a reputation for being aggressive, for moving fast, for getting results. Apparently, he also had a reputation for cutting corners. She looked up at the officers standing in her apartment. Some were young, barely out of the academy. Others looked more experienced. All of them looked deeply uncomfortable now. They should be, Jordan thought. Because this wasn't just embarrassing. This was dangerous. Let me ask you something, Jordan said, her instructor voice coming out now. Before you came through that door, how many of you verified the apartment number against any database? Utility records? Lease information? Building management? Silence. The officers looked at each other, then at the floor. How many of you questioned a warrant description that only listed race and age for a building with over 200 residents? More silence. One of the younger officers, a woman who couldn't have been more than 25, spoke up quietly. We were told the information was solid. Detective Williams said he had a reliable informant who confirmed she lived in this building. This building, Jordan repeated. Not this apartment. This building. The young officer nodded, looking miserable. Jordan felt anger rising in her chest, but she pushed it down. Getting angry wouldn't fix this. Getting angry wouldn't change what had happened. But maybe, just maybe, she could turn this disaster into something useful. Do any of you know who I am? She asked. Besides my name and badge number? The officers shook their heads. Then one of them, a guy who'd been standing near her bedroom door, suddenly straightened up. His eyes went wide. Wait, he said. Hayes, Jordan Hayes? He took a step closer, staring at her face. Oh my God, you're Dr. Hayes. You taught my unit's de-escalation seminar. 3 months ago, downtown training center. Jordan recognized him now too. He'd sat in the second row, asked good questions, seemed genuinely interested in learning. His name was Rodriguez. He'd been taking notes the entire time. That's right, Jordan said. Rodriguez looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him. Oh no, oh no, no, no. 2 other officers were looking at Jordan with growing recognition now. They'd been in her classes too. Different sessions, different topics, but they'd all sat in her training rooms at some point. They'd all listened to her explain proper procedures, correct protocols, the importance of verification and double-checking information. And now they were standing in her apartment, having just executed a raid based on sloppy warrant work and incomplete information. Sir, Rodriguez said to the lead officer, his voice tight with emotion. She literally taught us about this exact situation. Wrong address raids, the importance of verification. She showed us case studies. People who got hurt because units didn't confirm their information. The lead officer looked at Jordan with an expression she couldn't quite read. Shame, fear? Maybe both. We had a case in the presentation, Jordan said softly. Remember it, Rodriguez. Atlanta, 2019. Officers raided the wrong apartment based on bad information. Elderly woman, 73 years old, had a heart attack from the stress. Died in the hospital 2 days later. Rodriguez nodded, his face pale. I remember. I showed you that case for a reason, Jordan continued. Not to scare you, not to make you paranoid, but to make you understand that speed without accuracy kills, that assumptions can destroy lives, that every single warrant, every single raid deserves your full attention and verification. She looked around at all of them. Some were meeting her eyes, others were staring at their boots. I'm not hurt, Jordan said. I'm not elderly. I know how to comply with police commands, but I want all of you to think about something. What if I hadn't been me? What if I'd been confused, scared, didn't understand what was happening? What if I'd made the wrong move because I was terrified? The apartment was completely silent. Even the radio chatter from their shoulder mic seemed to have quieted. What if the actual suspect had been home in 4B while you were here? Jordan pressed on. What if she'd heard you coming and ran? What if she'd destroyed evidence while you were searching the wrong apartment? The lead officer's jaw worked. We would have lost her. You would have lost her, Jordan confirmed. And you would have traumatized an innocent person. And depending on how that innocent person reacted, someone might have gotten hurt, all because nobody took 5 minutes to verify an apartment number. She walked to her kitchen counter, picked up her now cold coffee and poured it down the sink. Her hands were steadier than she expected. Maybe the training really did work. Maybe all those hours practicing stress management actually paid off. "So here's what's going to happen," Jordan said, turning back to face them. "You're going to leave my apartment. You're going to go find the correct apartment. You're going to execute your warrant properly. And then we're going to have a very long conversation about how this happened and how we make sure it never happens again." The lead officer nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." "And one more thing," Jordan added. "I'm filing a report. Not because I want anyone punished, but because this needs to be documented. This needs to be studied. This needs to become another case study so the next group of officers I train understands exactly what can go wrong when protocols aren't followed." She could see them processing this, understanding that this wasn't just going to disappear, that there would be consequences, maybe not for them personally, but for the system that had allowed this to happen. As the officers began to file out of her apartment, Rodriguez stopped at the door. "Dr. Hayes, I'm sorry. I'm really, really sorry." Jordan looked at the young officer. He was genuinely remorseful. She could see it in his eyes. "I know you are," she said. "Make sure you learn from this. That's all I ask." After they left, Jordan stood in her destroyed apartment. She looked at the open drawers, the moved furniture, the disorder where there had been order. Then she pulled out her phone and started taking pictures, documentation, evidence. Not for revenge, but for change. Because if this could happen to her, a trained federal agent who knew exactly how the system worked, it could happen to anyone. After the officers left, Jordan stood in her apartment for a full minute without moving. The silence felt strange after all the chaos. She could hear her refrigerator humming, a car alarm going off somewhere outside. Normal sounds. Like the world hadn't just turned upside down. She walked slowly through her apartment, looking at everything with fresh eyes. They'd been thorough, she had to give them that. Professional, even. Nothing was broken. Nothing was damaged. But everything felt violated. Her privacy had been stripped away by people who were supposed to protect it. Jordan pulled out her phone and called her supervisor. It was Saturday morning, early, but this couldn't wait. "Bennett," a gruff voice answered on the third ring. "Sir, it's Hayes. We have a situation." She explained what had happened, keeping her voice level and professional. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "They raided you." "You?" Her supervisor sounded like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. "Where are they now?" "They left to find the correct apartment. 4B instead of 4D. Jesus Christ. She heard movement on the other end like he was getting out of bed. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Angry but fine. Sir, I need to file a formal report on this." "Damn right you do. I'll meet you at the office in an hour." "And Hayes, don't clean anything up yet. I want photos of everything." Jordan had already taken dozens of pictures, but she took more after they hung up. Every open drawer, every moved piece of furniture, the indent in her carpet where she'd been lying face down, evidence, documentation. This was going to be a case study, whether the police department liked it or not. While she waited, she decided to get dressed. Standing in her bedroom, picking out clothes from her ransacked closet, she noticed something. Her hands were shaking now. During the raid, she'd been calm, controlled, professional. But now, in the quiet aftermath, the adrenaline was wearing off and reality was setting in. She sat down on her bed, taking deep breaths. This was delayed stress response. She'd taught about this too. Your body holds it together during the crisis, then falls apart when the danger passes. It was normal, natural. But knowing that didn't make it feel any better. Jordan thought about the warrant she'd read. Crystal Montgomery. Late 30s to mid-40s. Black woman. Riverside Apartments. That description could have fit at least 30 women in this building alone. Maybe more. How many other apartments had been considered? Or had they just picked one at random? No, not random. Someone had given them apartment 4B. An informant, they'd said. But somehow that information had gotten garbled, transformed into 4D. Maybe the informant had said 4B quickly, and someone heard 4D. Maybe someone wrote it down wrong. Maybe the apartment numbers weren't clearly marked. It could have been anything, but that was the problem. Could have been shouldn't be acceptable when you're breaking down someone's door. Jordan finished getting dressed and started putting her apartment back together. Not because she wanted to erase what happened, but because she needed to do something with her hands. As she worked, her mind kept going back to the officers' faces when they'd realized who she was, Rodriguez especially. That young officer had looked devastated. She'd seen that look before, usually on officers who'd made their first major mistake. The moment when they realized that real police work wasn't like the movies. That mistakes had consequences. That real people got hurt. She remembered him from the training session. He'd been eager, asking questions about de-escalation techniques, taking notes on everything. He'd wanted to be a good officer, and he probably was a good officer. But good officers could still make bad mistakes when the system failed them, and the system had definitely failed here. Jordan's phone buzzed. A text from her supervisor. On my way. Coffee? She smiled slightly. Bennett knew her well. Large, black, strong enough to wake the dead. Copy that. While she waited, Jordan pulled out her laptop. She wanted to document everything while it was fresh in her mind. The exact time the officers arrived. What they said. How they said it. The sequence of events. The moment of recognition. All of it. She'd just started typing when she heard voices in the hallway. Not loud, but agitated. Jordan moved to her door and looked through the peephole. She could see several of her neighbors standing in the hallway, talking in worried clusters. The raid must have woken them up. Of course it had. When police come crashing through a building at 7 in the morning, everyone notices. Great. Now she'd have to explain this to her neighbors. People she'd lived next to for 3 years. People who knew her as the quiet professional who left for work early and came home late. What were they thinking now? Did they wonder what she'd done? Did they think she was a criminal? There was a knock on her door. Softer this time, almost hesitant. Jordan opened it to find Mrs. Chen from across the hall. She was in her 70s, a tiny woman who always had a kind word and homemade cookies. Jordan, dear, are you all right? We heard such commotion this morning. I'm fine, Mrs. Chen. There was a mistake. The police were looking for someone in a different apartment. Mrs. Chen's eyes widened. They had the wrong apartment? Oh, that's terrible. Were you frightened? A little, Jordan admitted. But I'm okay, really. Well, if you need anything, you just knock on my door. I'm making soup today. I'll bring some over later. After Mrs. Chen left, Jordan closed the door and leaned against it. That's what this was really about. Not just procedures and protocols. People. Mrs. Chen, who baked cookies and made soup for her neighbors. Rodriguez, who wanted to be a good cop. The woman in apartment 4B, whoever she was, who might be involved in something illegal, but still deserved to be arrested with accuracy and professionalism. Everyone in this building deserved better than sloppy police work. Jordan went back to her laptop and continued typing. She documented everything, including her own thoughts and feelings. This wasn't just going to be a dry incident report. This was going to be a comprehensive analysis of everything that went wrong and why. She was deep into writing when her phone rang again. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Agent Hayes? A woman's voice, official sounding. Speaking. This is Lieutenant Patterson from the Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. I've been informed of this morning's incident. I need to schedule a formal interview with you as soon as possible. So it was already moving up the chain? Good. That meant the department was taking it seriously. I'm available this afternoon, Jordan said. Would 2 o'clock work? That's fine. After she hung up, Jordan sat back in her chair. Internal affairs. That meant there would be a real investigation. The officers would have to give statements. The detective who prepared the warrant would have to explain his process. Everything would be examined and questioned. Part of her felt bad for the officers. They'd just been following orders, executing a warrant they'd been given. But another part of her, the instructor part, knew that following orders wasn't an excuse for not thinking. Every officer had a responsibility to question information that didn't make sense, to verify before acting, to think before doing. She looked around her apartment again. It was starting to look normal. Drawers closed. Books back on shelves. Order restored. But she knew things weren't really normal. They might never be completely normal again. Because now when she taught her classes, when she showed those case studies of wrong address raids, she wouldn't just be talking about other people's experiences. She'd be talking about her own. She'd be able to tell them exactly what it felt like to be on the wrong end of a police action. The fear, the helplessness, the violation of privacy. Maybe that would make her a better instructor. Maybe officers would listen more carefully when they knew she'd lived through it, or maybe it would just make her angry every time she had to teach it. Jordan closed her laptop and stood up. She needed to shower, get ready for her meeting with her supervisor, but first she wanted to do something. She walked to her door, opened it, and looked down the hallway toward apartment 4B. The door was closed. No signs of police activity. Either they'd already executed the warrant, or they were still working up the courage to do it right this time. She hoped whoever lived there, guilty or not, was treated with more care than she had been. She hoped they verified the apartment 3 times before knocking. She hoped they learned something from this disaster. But hope wasn't enough. Hope didn't create change. Documentation did. Accountability did. Training did. Jordan closed her door and went to get ready. She had work to do. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every person who might wake up to that terrifying pounding on their door. Every person who might be in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong description. This was about making sure that the next time officers executed a warrant, they got the address right. 3 days after the raid, Jordan sat in a conference room at the FBI field office, surrounded by photographs and documents spread across the table. Her supervisor, Agent Bennett, sat across from her, reviewing the incident report she'd written. It was thorough, 15 pages single-spaced with photo documentation and a detailed timeline. "This is good work," Bennett said, looking up. "Comprehensive. But I have to ask, are you sure you want to push this hard? The department has already apologized. Internal Affairs is investigating." "You could let it go," Jordan shook her head. "This isn't about revenge, sir. It's about prevention. If I let this go, nothing changes. Some report gets filed, maybe someone gets a slap on the wrist, and next month it happens to someone else." "Fair enough." Bennett closed the folder. "The police chief wants to meet with you personally. He's not happy about this." "I imagine not," Jordan said. "Having one of your units raid an FBI training instructor doesn't look good. That's putting it mildly." Bennett leaned back in his chair. "But here's the thing. You've got leverage right now. The department knows this could blow up into a media nightmare. So if you want changes, real changes, now's the time to push for them." Jordan had been thinking about exactly that. Not about revenge or embarrassment, but about what could actually prevent this from happening again. She'd made a list. Before she could share it, there was a knock on the conference room door. Another agent poked his head in. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here to see Agent Hayes. Says it's important." Jordan frowned. "I don't have any appointments scheduled." He says he was one of the officers. "Rodriguez?" Jordan and Bennett exchanged glances. "Send him in," Jordan said. The young officer who'd recognized her during the raid walked into the conference room looking nervous. He was in civilian clothes, jeans, and a polo shirt, and he was holding a manila folder. "Agent Hayes, I'm sorry to show up unannounced," Rodriguez said quickly. "I tried calling but couldn't get through." "I needed to talk to you." "Sit down," Jordan said, gesturing to a chair. "This is my supervisor, Agent Bennett." "What's going on?" Rodriguez sat, placing the folder on the table. "I couldn't stop thinking about what happened, about how badly we messed up, so I started looking into our procedures, how we prepare for warrant executions, how we verify information." He opened the folder. "And I found some things you need to see." Jordan pulled the folder closer. Inside were copies of warrant reports, raid briefings, procedure documents. Rodriguez had highlighted certain sections. "This wasn't the first time," Rodriguez said quietly. "Wrong address raids, I mean. I went back through our unit's records for the past 2 years. There have been 7 incidents where we executed warrants at incorrect locations." Bennett leaned forward. "7?" "7," Rodriguez confirmed. "Most of them were apartment mix-ups like yours. One was a house number transposition. None of them resulted in serious injuries. So they were just written up as administrative errors. Apologies issued, reports filed, everyone moves on." Jordan felt her anger rising again, but she kept her voice calm. "Were any of these incidents used for training purposes? To show officers what went wrong?" Rodriguez shook his head. "No, ma'am. They were kept quiet. The department didn't want negative publicity." "Of course they didn't," Bennett muttered. Jordan flipped through the documents. Each one told a similar story. Rushed warrant preparation. Incomplete verification. Assumptions made. Mistakes buried. She stopped on one particular report. This one, she said, pointing. Elderly couple, both in their 80s. Officers broke down their door at 5 in the morning looking for their neighbor's son. The husband had a stroke from the stress. Spent a week in the hospital. Rodriguez nodded grimly. I remember hearing about that one. They were told not to talk about it outside the unit. Why are you showing me this? Jordan asked, looking up at the young officer. You could get in trouble for bringing internal documents to us. Rodriguez met her eyes. Because it's not right. I became a cop to help people, not to terrorize innocent civilians because we're too lazy or rushed to check an apartment number. When I sat in your class, when you talked about accountability and doing the right thing even when it's hard, I believed it. I still believe it. There was a long moment of silence. Jordan studied the young officer. He was taking a real risk being here. If his superiors found out he'd shared internal documents with the FBI, his career could be over before it really started. Have you made copies of these? She asked. That's all I have. The originals are still in our system. Jordan looked at Bennett. We need to document this officially. Bennett nodded. Officer Rodriguez, we're going to need you to make a formal statement. Are you prepared to do that? Rodriguez swallowed hard, but he nodded. Yes, sir. You understand this might have consequences for your career? Bennett pressed, I understand. But if I stay quiet, there will be consequences for innocent people. I've already seen it happen. I won't be part of covering it up anymore. Jordan felt a spark of hope. This was what she'd been trying to teach in all those hours of training sessions. Not just procedures and protocols, but moral courage. The willingness to speak up when something was wrong, even when it was difficult. Thank you, she said to Rodriguez. What you're doing takes guts. You took guts too, Rodriguez replied. You could have just accepted the apology and moved on. Instead, you're fighting to fix the system. That's what we should all be doing. After Rodriguez left to give his formal statement to another agent, Bennett looked at Jordan with something like pride in his eyes. You've got an ally, he said. A whistleblower from inside the department. That changes things. It does, Jordan agreed. But we need to protect him. If the department retaliates against him for coming forward, it'll discourage anyone else from speaking up. Already thinking about it, Bennett said. We'll make sure his statement is handled carefully. Jordan looked back down at the documents Rodriguez had brought. 7 incidents, 7 families who'd been traumatized by police mistakes, 7 opportunities for the department to learn and improve that had been buried instead. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Officer Chen from the raid. Can we talk? I have information you need. Jordan showed the text to Bennett. Looks like Rodriguez isn't the only one with a conscience. The floodgates are opening, Bennett observed. Once one person speaks up, others feel safer doing the same. Jordan texted back, FBI field office downtown. Ask for Agent Hayes. Within an hour, Officer Chen arrived. She was one of the officers who'd been in Jordan's apartment during the raid. A woman in her early 30s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I was in your training on implicit bias, Chen said as soon as she sat down. 6 months ago. You talked about how racial profiling can lead to lazy police work. Jordan remembered that seminar. It had been intense, with some officers pushing back hard against the suggestion that they might be influenced by unconscious bias. I remember, Jordan said. The warrant description for Crystal Montgomery was basically racial profiling, Chen said bluntly. Black woman, late 30s to 40s, Riverside Apartments. Do you know how many women fit that description in that building alone? I counted 37. You counted? Bennett asked. After the raid, I couldn't stop thinking about it, so I went through the building's resident list. 37 black women between the ages of 35 and 50 live in Riverside Apartments. We rated you based on a description that could have applied to 37 different people. Jordan felt sick. Did anyone question this before the raid? Chen shook her head. The detective who prepared the warrant, Williams, he has a reputation. If you question his information, he makes your life difficult. So most people just go along with whatever he says. Not anymore, Jordan said firmly. This ends now. Chen pulled out her own folder. I documented everything I could find about Detective Williams' warrant preparation process. He cuts corners a lot. He relies heavily on informants but doesn't verify their information. He rushes through the paperwork. And he's got a particular pattern. She laid out several warrant copies. Jordan saw it immediately. In case after case, the suspect descriptions were vague. Often they included race as a primary identifier with minimal other details. And in a disproportionate number of cases, those suspects were Black or Hispanic. "This is systemic," Bennett said quietly. "It is," Chen agreed, "and it's been going on for years. But Williams gets results. He makes arrests. So nobody looks too closely at his methods." Jordan thought about all her training sessions, all the hours she'd spent trying to teach officers to be better, to think more carefully, to question their assumptions, and here was proof that in at least one department, those lessons weren't being applied because one detective had too much power and too little oversight. "Will you make a formal statement?" Jordan asked Chen. "Already prepared one," Chen said, pulling out more papers. "Everything's documented. Dates, cases, patterns. I'm ready to testify if needed." After Chen left, Jordan sat back in her chair, exhausted but energized at the same time. 2 officers had come forward. 2 people willing to risk their careers to do the right thing. "This is bigger than your raid," Bennett said. "This is about a whole pattern of misconduct." "I know," Jordan said. "And we're going to bring it all into the light." 3 days after the raid, Jordan sat in a conference room at the FBI field office, surrounded by photographs and documents spread across the table. Her supervisor, Agent Bennett, sat across from her, reviewing the incident report she'd written. It was thorough. 15 pages, single-spaced, with photo documentation and a detailed timeline. "This is good work," Bennett said, looking up. "Comprehensive. But I have to ask, are you sure you want to push this hard? The department has already apologized. Internal Affairs is investigating. You could let it go." Jordan shook her head. "This isn't about revenge, sir. It's about prevention. If I let this go, nothing changes. Some report gets filed, maybe someone gets a slap on the wrist, and next month it happens to someone else." "Fair enough." Bennett closed the folder. "The police chief wants to meet with you personally. He's not happy about this." "I imagine not," Jordan said. "Having one of your units raid an FBI training instructor doesn't look good. That's putting it mildly." Bennett leaned back in his chair. "But here's the thing. You've got leverage right now. The department knows this could blow up into a media nightmare. So if you want changes, real changes, now's the time to push for them." Jordan had been thinking about exactly that. Not about revenge or embarrassment, but about what could actually prevent this from happening again. She'd made a list. Before she could share it, there was a knock on the conference room door. Another agent poked his head in. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here to see Agent Hayes. Says it's important." Jordan frowned. "I don't have any appointments scheduled." "He says he was one of the officers." "Rodriguez?" Jordan and Bennett exchanged glances. "Send him in," Jordan said. The young officer who'd recognized her during the raid walked into the conference room looking nervous. He was in civilian clothes, jeans, and a polo shirt, and he was holding a manila folder. "Agent Hayes, I'm sorry to show up unannounced," Rodriguez said quickly. "I tried calling but couldn't get through. I needed to talk to you." "Sit down," Jordan said, gesturing to a chair. "This is my supervisor, Agent Bennett. What's going on?" Rodriguez sat, placing the folder on the table. "I couldn't stop thinking about what happened, about how badly we messed up. So I started looking into our procedures, how we prepare for warrant executions, how we verify information." He opened the folder. "And I found some things you need to see." Jordan pulled the folder closer. Inside were copies of warrant reports, raid briefings, procedure documents. Rodriguez had highlighted certain sections. "This wasn't the first time," Rodriguez said quietly. "Wrong address raids, I mean. I went back through our unit's records for the past 2 years. There have been 7 incidents where we executed warrants at incorrect locations." Bennett leaned forward. "7? 7, Rodriguez confirmed. "Most of them were apartment mix-ups like yours. One was a house number transposition. None of them resulted in serious injuries, so they were just written up as administrative errors. Apologies issued, reports filed, everyone moves on." Jordan felt her anger rising again, but she kept her voice calm. "Were any of these incidents used for training purposes? To show officers what went wrong?" Rodriguez shook his head. "No, ma'am. They were kept quiet. The department didn't want negative publicity. Of course they didn't, Bennett muttered. Jordan flipped through the documents. Each one told a similar story: rushed warrant preparation, incomplete verification, assumptions made, mistakes buried. She stopped on one particular report. This one, she said, pointing. Elderly couple, both in their 80s. Officers broke down their door at 5 in the morning looking for their neighbor's son. The husband had a stroke from the stress, spent a week in the hospital. Rodriguez nodded grimly. I remember hearing about that one. They were told not to talk about it outside the unit. Why are you showing me this? Jordan asked, looking up at the young officer. You could get in trouble for bringing internal documents to us. Rodriguez met her eyes. Because it's not right. I became a cop to help people, not to terrorize innocent civilians because we're too lazy or rushed to check an apartment number. When I sat in your class, when you talked about accountability and doing the right thing even when it's hard, I believed it. I still believe it. There was a long moment of silence. Jordan studied the young officer. He was taking a real risk being here. If his superiors found out he'd shared internal documents with the FBI, his career could be over before it really started. Have you made copies of these? She asked. That's all I have. The originals are still in our system. Jordan looked at Bennett. We need to document this, officially. Bennett nodded. Officer Rodriguez, we're going to need you to make a formal statement. Are you prepared to do that? Rodriguez swallowed hard, but he nodded. Yes, sir. You understand this might have consequences for your career? Bennett pressed. I understand. But if I stay quiet, there will be consequences for innocent people. I've already seen it happen. I won't be part of covering it up anymore. Jordan felt a spark of hope. This was what she'd been trying to teach in all those hours of training sessions. Not just procedures and protocols, but moral courage. The willingness to speak up when something was wrong, even when it was difficult. Thank you, she said to Rodriguez. What you're doing takes guts. You took guts too, Rodriguez replied. You could have just accepted the apology and moved on. Instead, you're fighting to fix the system. That's what we should all be doing. After Rodriguez left to give his formal statement to another agent, Bennett looked at Jordan with something like pride in his eyes. You've got an ally, he said. A whistleblower from inside the department. That changes things. It does, Jordan agreed. But we need to protect him. If the department retaliates against him for coming forward, it'll discourage anyone else from speaking up. Already thinking about it, Bennett said. We'll make sure his statement is handled carefully. Jordan looked back down at the documents Rodriguez had brought. 7 incidents. 7 families who'd been traumatized by police mistakes. 7 opportunities for the department to learn and improve that had been buried instead. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Officer Chen from the raid. Can we talk? I have information you need. Jordan showed the text to Bennett. Looks like Rodriguez isn't the only one with a conscience. The floodgates are opening, Bennett observed. Once one person speaks up, others feel safer doing the same. Jordan texted back. FBI field office downtown. Ask for Agent Hayes. Within an hour, Officer Chen arrived. She was one of the officers who'd been in Jordan's apartment during the raid, a woman in her early 30s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I was in your training on implicit bias, Chen said as soon as she sat down. 6 months ago, you talked about how racial profiling can lead to lazy police work. Jordan remembered that seminar. It had been intense, with some officers pushing back hard against the suggestion that they might be influenced by unconscious bias. I remember, Jordan said. The warrant description for Crystal Montgomery was basically racial profiling, Chen said bluntly. Black woman, late 30s to 40s, Riverside Apartments. Do you know how many women fit that description in that building alone? I counted. 37. You counted? Bennett asked. After the raid, I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I went through the building's resident list. 37 black women between the ages of 35 and 50 live in Riverside Apartments. We rated you based on a description that could have applied to 37 different people. Jordan felt sick. Did anyone question this before the raid? Chen shook her head. The detective who prepared the warrant, Williams, he has a reputation. If you question his information, he makes your life difficult. So most people just go along with whatever he says. Not anymore, Jordan said firmly. This ends now. Chen pulled out her own folder. I documented everything I could find about Detective Williams's warrant preparation process. He cuts corners, a lot. He relies heavily on informants but doesn't verify their information. He rushes through the paperwork. And he's got a particular pattern. She laid out several warrant copies. Jordan saw it immediately. In case after case, the suspect descriptions were vague. Often they included race as a primary identifier with minimal other details. And in a disproportionate number of cases, those suspects were Black or Hispanic. This is systemic, Bennett said quietly. It is, Chen agreed. And it's been going on for years. But Williams gets results. He makes arrests. So nobody looks too closely at his methods. Jordan thought about all her training sessions, all the hours she'd spent trying to teach officers to be better, to think more carefully, to question their assumptions. And here was proof that in at least one department those lessons weren't being applied because one detective had too much power and too little oversight. Will you make a formal statement? Jordan asked Chen. Already prepared one, Chen said, pulling out more papers. Everything's documented. Dates, cases, patterns. I'm ready to testify if needed. After Chen left, Jordan sat back in her chair, exhausted but energized at the same time. 2 officers had come forward, 2 people willing to risk their careers to do the right thing. This is bigger than your raid, Bennett said. This is about a whole pattern of misconduct. I know, Jordan said, and we're going to bring it all into the light. The meeting was scheduled for 2 days later in the mayor's office. Jordan arrived early, dressed in her formal FBI suit, carrying 2 folders thick with documentation. She'd barely slept in the past 48 hours, spending most of her time preparing a presentation that would make her case impossible to ignore. Bennett met her in the lobby. You ready for this? As ready as I'll ever be, Jordan said. Who's coming? The police chief, the mayor, the city attorney, a representative from the police union, and the head of internal affairs. It's going to be a room full of people who don't want to hear what you have to say. Then I'll just have to make them listen. They were led into a large conference room with windows overlooking the city. Jordan set up her laptop and connected it to the projection screen. One by one, the others filed in. The police chief, a man in his 50s with iron-gray hair, looked at her with barely concealed annoyance. The mayor, younger and more political, gave her a tight smile. The union representative didn't even make eye contact. Let's get started, the mayor said once everyone was seated. Agent Hayes, I understand you have concerns about the recent incident at your residence. It's more than concerns, Jordan said, standing up and moving to the front of the room. What happened to me was a symptom of a much larger problem. With your permission, I'd like to show you exactly what I mean. She clicked to her first slide. A photo of her apartment, drawers open, belongings scattered. This is my home after officers executed a warrant for the wrong apartment. Wrong building wing, wrong number, wrong person. I'm an FBI training instructor. I knew how to comply with police commands. I didn't panic, didn't resist, didn't make any sudden moves. But I want you to imagine if I had been someone else. Elderly, confused, hard of hearing, limited English. What might have happened then? The room was quiet. Jordan clicked to the next slide. This raid was based on a warrant with minimal identifying information. The description of the suspect was Black woman, late 30s to mid-40s, Riverside Apartments. That description matches 37 women in that building. 37. And yet the warrant was approved and executed without any photographic verification, without checking utility records, without confirming the specific apartment through any secondary source. The police chief shifted in his seat. Agent Hayes, while I understand you're upset about what happened, mistakes do occur in police work. We've already apologized and opened an investigation. I know mistakes happen, Jordan said calmly. That's why I teach courses on how to prevent them. But this wasn't a random mistake. It was the result of a pattern of shortcuts and poor procedures. She clicked again. A table appeared showing 7 previous incidents, dates, and descriptions. In the past 2 years, your department has executed warrants at wrong addresses 7 times. That we know of. 7 families traumatized. 7 opportunities to learn and improve that were buried in administrative reports. And 3 days ago, after the raid on my apartment, officers went to what they thought was the correct apartment and raided another wrong location. A pregnant woman went into early labor from the stress. Meanwhile, the actual suspect escaped because someone had time to warn her. The mayor leaned forward. I wasn't aware of multiple incidents. That's because they were kept quiet, Jordan said. Filed as administrative errors and forgotten. No training updates. No procedure changes. Just apologies and hope that it wouldn't happen again. She clicked to her next slide. Photos of warrant documents with certain sections highlighted. These warrants were all prepared by the same detective, Detective Williams from Narcotics, and they all share common problems. Vague descriptions, heavy reliance on race as a primary identifier, minimal verification requirements, rushed preparation. The union representative spoke up. Are you accusing Detective Williams of racial profiling? I'm saying the evidence suggests a pattern that needs to be examined, Jordan said carefully. In 15 warrants prepared by Detective Williams over the past 18 months, 12 of them listed race as the first or second identifying characteristic with minimal other specific details. In comparison, warrants prepared by other detectives in the same department averaged 30% for similar descriptions. She let that sink in. Numbers were harder to argue with than feelings. But this isn't just about one detective, Jordan continued. It's about a system that allowed these practices to continue. Officers who executed these warrants should have questioned the lack of specific information. Supervisors who approved them should have required better verification. And when mistakes happened, the department should have used them as learning opportunities instead of covering them up. The police chief's face was red now. We don't cover things up. We follow proper reporting procedures. Do you? Jordan clicked to another slide. Copies of incident reports with sections marked. These reports classify wrong address raids as administrative errors. They're filed in a way that makes them difficult to track or analyze. There's no flagging system to identify patterns. No automatic review when multiple incidents occur. The pregnant woman who went into early labor? Her incident was initially filed the same way. Just another administrative error. Bennett spoke up for the first time. The FBI has offered to assist with procedure review multiple times over the past 5 years. Those offers were declined. The city attorney, who'd been taking notes furiously, looked up. Is that accurate, Chief? The police chief shifted uncomfortably. We felt our procedures were adequate. Clearly they're not, the mayor said sharply. Agent Hayes, what are you proposing? This was the moment Jordan had been preparing for. She clicked to a new slide titled, Recommendations for Immediate Implementation. First, mandatory address verification through at least 2 independent sources before any warrant execution. Building management records, utility databases, visual confirmation when possible. Second, any warrant description that relies primarily on race, age, or other broad characteristics must include photographic identification or additional specific identifying information. Third, wrong address incidents are reclassified from administrative errors to critical incidents requiring immediate review and training updates. She continued through her list. Enhanced training requirements, regular audits of warrant preparation, protection for officers who report procedural concerns, a civilian review board for wrong address raids. These aren't radical suggestions, Jordan said. Most federal agencies already use similar procedures. The FBI has been using them for years. They work. The union representative crossed his arms. This sounds like you're trying to make officers' jobs harder. We're already stretched thin. Adding more bureaucracy will slow down our response to real threats. Would you rather be fast or accurate? Jordan asked directly. Because in my apartment that morning you were fast. You were very fast. You were also completely wrong. And if I had been the person you were actually looking for, she would have escaped while you were raiding the wrong place. So your speed didn't just traumatize an innocent person. It also failed to catch a guilty one. The room went silent. The union representative looked like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Jordan softened her tone slightly. I'm not trying to make officers' jobs harder. I'm trying to make them safer and more effective. Every wrong address raid puts officers at risk. It puts innocent civilians at risk. It wastes resources and damages community trust. And it often results in the actual suspect getting away. Nobody wins in these situations. The mayor looked at the police chief. How quickly can we implement these recommendations? We'd need to review them carefully, the chief said. Consult with legal, work with a union, develop training materials. You have 2 weeks, the mayor said flatly. I want a concrete implementation plan on my desk. Agent Hayes, would you be willing to assist with developing the training materials? Jordan nodded. Absolutely. And the officers who came forward with information, Bennett added. They need protection from retaliation. Officer Rodriguez, Officer Chen, Officer Liu, they did the right thing. They should be commended, not punished. The union representative finally spoke up again. The union will support that. Officers should feel safe reporting problems. After the meeting ended, several people came up to shake Jordan's hand. The mayor pulled her aside. That took courage, he said quietly. You could have just accepted an apology and let it go. Instead, you're forcing us to confront uncomfortable truths. Someone had to, Jordan said. And I had the credentials and the knowledge to do it effectively. Not everyone who gets raided by mistake has that advantage. As she packed up her laptop, the police chief approached. He looked tired, older than he had at the start of the meeting. I didn't know about all the incidents, he said. That's on me. I should have been paying closer attention. It's never too late to start, Jordan said. Your officers want to do better. I've seen it. Rodriguez, Chen, Liu, they all want to be good cops. They just need better systems to support them. Will you really help with the training? He asked. On one condition, Jordan said. I want to be honest in that training. I want to use real examples, including what happened to me. I want officers to hear from the pregnant woman who went into early labor. I want them to understand the real human cost of these mistakes. 2 weeks after the mayor's meeting, Jordan found herself back in a conference room. This time it was at the police department's internal affairs division, and the atmosphere was completely different. Where the mayor's office had been tense and defensive, this room felt focused and determined. Internal Affairs Lieutenant Patterson sat at the head of the table, surrounded by case files and laptop computers. She was a woman in her late 40s with sharp features and an intensity that reminded Jordan of herself. We've been digging, Patterson said without preamble, and what we found is worse than we thought. Jordan had been working with Patterson's team for the past week, providing insight from her FBI training perspective. The investigation had started with Detective Williams and his warrant procedures, but it had quickly expanded into something much larger. Show me, Jordan said. Patterson pulled up a spreadsheet on the projector. We went back 5 years instead of just 2. We found 23 wrong address raids, 23. Some resulted in property damage. Several resulted in medical emergencies. One nearly resulted in an officer-involved shooting when a confused homeowner reached for what the officer thought was a weapon, but was actually a phone. Jordan felt sick. 23 incidents in 5 years, and nobody noticed a pattern? Oh, someone noticed, Patterson said grimly. We found emails from 3 different supervisors over the years, questioning the frequency of these errors. But those concerns were dismissed by upper management as statistically insignificant, given the total number of warrants executed. How many total warrants? Jordan asked. Approximately 3,000 over 5 years. So 23 errors is less than 1%. Management viewed that as acceptable. Jordan stood up, too agitated to sit still. Acceptable? Each one of those incidents is a family traumatized. A life disrupted. Trust destroyed. How is that acceptable at any percentage? It's not, Patterson agreed. Which is why we're here. The mayor has given us full authority to investigate and recommend changes. No politics. No covering up. We're going to tear this apart and rebuild it right. Over the next hour, Patterson walked Jordan through what they'd discovered. The problems went far beyond Detective Williams, though he was certainly part of it. The entire system had developed bad habits over years of pressure to move fast, make arrests, show results. Warrant preparation had become a rushed process. Judges were signing off on warrants with minimal scrutiny because they trusted the officers preparing them. Supervisors were approving raids without proper review because everyone was overworked and understaffed. And when mistakes happened, they were treated as isolated incidents rather than symptoms of systemic problems. Here's something interesting, Patterson said, pulling up another document. We analyzed the demographics of wrong address raid victims. Want to guess what we found? Jordan had a sinking feeling she knew. Disproportionately minorities. 68% of wrong address raids over 5 years happened in predominantly minority neighborhoods. 43% of victims were black, 32% Hispanic, 18% Asian, 7% white. The numbers hit Jordan like a punch. That's not a coincidence. No, it's not. We compared those numbers to the overall demographics of areas where warrants were executed. The disproportion is significant. Wrong address raids happened at 3 times the rate in minority neighborhoods compared to predominantly white areas. Jordan sat back down, processing this. Why? Patterson pulled up more data. Multiple factors. Apartment buildings in lower-income areas tend to have less clear numbering systems. Building layouts can be confusing, but that doesn't account for the entire disparity. We also found that warrant descriptions for suspects in minority neighborhoods relied more heavily on race and less on specific identifying features. Like my warrant, Jordan said quietly. Exactly like yours. When the suspect was white, descriptions averaged 4 to 5 specific identifying characteristics. Tattoos, vehicle descriptions, known associates, employment information. When the suspect was a minority, descriptions averaged 2 to 3 characteristics, with race almost always listed first. Jordan thought about all the training sessions she'd conducted on implicit bias. She'd talked about how unconscious assumptions could influence police work, how officers might not even realize they were treating different communities differently. Now she was seeing the statistical proof. We need to show this to officers, Jordan said. Not to shame them, but to make them aware. Most cops don't think they're biased. They need to see the data. Agreed, Patterson said. But we've got another problem. Detective Williams. Jordan had been wondering when they'd get to him. What did you find? Patterson's expression darkened. Williams has been cutting corners for years. We reviewed 50 of his warrants. 32 of them had significant deficiencies, vague descriptions, minimal verification, rushed preparation. But here's the thing, he gets results. His arrest rate is high. His cases usually lead to convictions, so nobody questioned his methods. Until now, Jordan said. Until now. We've also found that Williams has a pattern of retaliation against officers who question him. 3 different officers over the past 4 years filed complaints about feeling pressured to execute warrants they thought were problematic. All 3 were transferred to less desirable assignments shortly after. Jordan felt her anger rising again. So officers knew there were problems but were afraid to speak up. Exactly. Williams had power and used it to protect his methods. But that's over now. He's been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. How's he taking it? Patterson smiled without humor. Not well. He's threatened to sue, claims this is politically motivated, says we're destroying the career of a good detective because of one mistake. His union rep is making noise about defending him. It wasn't one mistake, Jordan said firmly. It was a pattern of negligence over years. We know that. And we're going to prove it. But it's going to be a fight. They spent the next 2 hours going through specific cases, documenting patterns, building an airtight case not just against Williams, but against the systemic failures that had allowed his practices to continue. Jordan's phone rang during a break. It was Officer Chen. Agent Hayes, I thought you should know. There's been pushback from some officers about the new procedures you're recommending. They're saying it's too much red tape, that it'll make our jobs impossible. Jordan sighed. She'd expected this. How many officers? Hard to say. Maybe 20% of the department? The younger officers mostly support the changes. It's some of the veterans who are resistant. Set up a meeting, Jordan said. I want to talk to them directly. Not in a formal training setting. Just a conversation, you sure? Some of them are pretty angry. I'm sure. If we can't get buy-in from the officers who'll be implementing these changes, the whole thing fails. Better to address their concerns now. The meeting was arranged for the next day. Jordan walked into a room full of skeptical, sometimes hostile faces. About 30 officers sat in folding chairs, arms crossed, expressions guarded. She recognized a few from her previous training sessions. Jordan didn't use a PowerPoint, didn't stand at a podium. She pulled up a chair and sat down at their level. I know some of you think these new procedures are unnecessary, she began, that they're going to make your jobs harder. So I want to hear your concerns. Really hear them. But first I want to tell you something about the morning I got raided. She described lying on her carpet face down in her own home. The feeling of violation. The fear, even though she knew the procedures. The humiliation of having her privacy invaded. I'm trained for this, Jordan said. I know how to comply with police commands. I understand the protocols, and it was still terrifying. Now imagine you're not trained. Imagine you're elderly, confused, maybe you don't speak English well. Imagine you have young children in the apartment who wake up crying because strangers are yelling and searching through your home. The room was silent. Some officers were looking at the floor. Others were meeting her eyes. I'm not asking you to add meaningless paperwork, Jordan continued. I'm asking you to take 5 extra minutes to verify you're at the right address. To confirm you have the right person, because those 5 minutes could save someone from being traumatized, could save you from making a mistake you'll regret for the rest of your career. An older officer, a sergeant with 20+ years on the job, raised his hand. But what about when we need to move fast? When a suspect might be destroying evidence or running, then you move fast, Jordan said. But you move fast to the right address. The woman you were looking for in my building? She escaped because you were too busy raiding wrong apartments. Your speed didn't help. It hurt, another officer spoke up. Detective Williams says you're trying to ruin his career because you're angry about what happened. Jordan had expected this too. Detective Williams prepared a warrant with minimal identifying information, which led to multiple wrong addresses being raided. That's not about anger. That's about accountability. If a doctor kept performing surgery on the wrong patients, would you trust them to operate on you? But he gets results, someone else said. His arrest rate is one of the highest in the department. At what cost? Jordan asked. 4 months after the raid, Jordan stood backstage at the National Law Enforcement Training Conference in Denver. Her hands were shaking slightly, not from nervousness about speaking to large crowds. She'd done that hundreds of times, but from the weight of what she was about to share. This was the biggest law enforcement conference in the country. Over 2,000 officers, supervisors, trainers, and administrators from every state. The keynote address was usually reserved for police chiefs, federal directors, or high-ranking officials. But this year they'd asked her. The conference organizer, a captain from Seattle PD, approached with a headset microphone. 5 minutes, Agent Hayes. You ready? Jordan nodded, clipping the microphone to her collar. As ready as I'll ever be. The room is completely full. Standing room only. Word got out about what you're speaking on. Everyone wants to hear this. Through the curtain, Jordan could hear the crowd settling down. She recognized voices, saw familiar faces in the front rows. Officers she'd trained over the years. Supervisors she'd worked with. And in the third row, sitting together, Rodriguez, Chen, and Liu. They'd flown out for this using their own vacation time because they believed in what she was doing. The introduction began. The conference organizer listed Jordan's credentials, her years of service, her training expertise. Then he paused before the final line. 4 months ago, Agent Hayes' apartment was raided by mistake. What happened next changed how an entire police department approaches warrant execution, and what she learned could change how all of us do our jobs. The room went silent. Jordan took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The lights were bright, but she could still see faces in the audience. Some curious, some skeptical, some already nodding like they knew where this was going. Good morning, Jordan said, her voice strong and clear. I'm going to tell you a story about the worst morning of my life. And then I'm going to tell you how that morning became the catalyst for the most important work I've ever done. She started at the beginning, the pounding on her door, the officers streaming in, the feeling of her face pressed against her own carpet. She didn't spare any details. The fear, the humiliation, the violation of privacy. I'm a federal agent, Jordan said. I've been in law enforcement for nearly 20 years. I teach officers how to do their jobs. And I was terrified. So I want you to imagine, really imagine, what that experience is like for someone who doesn't have my training. Someone elderly, someone with limited English, someone with children in the next room. She saw faces in the audience changing, the skepticism fading, the attention focusing. But here's what made it worse, Jordan continued. When the officers realized who I was, when they saw my credentials, I watched the recognition hit them. Not just recognition of my name, recognition of what they'd done. Because 3 of those officers had been in my training sessions. They'd sat in my classroom and learned about proper warrant execution, about verification procedures, about the importance of accuracy. She paused, then gestured to the third row. Those officers are here today. Officer Rodriguez, Officer Chen, Officer Liu. Stand up, please. The 3 officers stood, looking uncomfortable but determined. The audience applauded, uncertain at first, then stronger. They're here because they had the courage to come forward, Jordan said. to admit mistakes, to provide information about systemic problems in their department. They risked their careers to do the right thing. And I want everyone in this room to understand, this is what real police work looks like. Not covering up errors, not protecting bad practices, but having the moral courage to say this is wrong and we need to fix it. The officer sat down and Jordan moved to the next part of her presentation. She showed the data. 23 wrong address raids, the demographic disparities, the patterns of rushed warrant preparation and minimal verification. This wasn't just my department, Jordan said. We surveyed 87 police departments across the country. 63% reported multiple wrong address incidents in the past 5 years. But here's the shocking part. Only 12% had implemented systematic changes to prevent future incidents. The rest treated each case as isolated, apologized and moved on. She clicked to a new slide showing the human cost. Photos of victims. Faces pixelated for privacy, but the impact visible in their body language. An elderly man who had a stroke. A pregnant woman who went into early labor. A teenager who developed anxiety so severe she can't sleep in her own room anymore. A military veteran with PTSD who nearly died defending his home because he thought he was under attack. These are real people whose lives were changed by preventable mistakes. The room was completely silent now. Jordan could have heard a pin drop. After my raid, I had a choice, she said. I could accept the apology, file a report, and move on with my life. Pretend it never happened. Let someone else deal with the problems. That would have been easier. That would have been more comfortable. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. But I'm not interested in comfortable. I'm interested in right. So instead, I documented everything. I analyzed the systemic failures. I worked with internal affairs to investigate patterns. I developed new training procedures. And I pushed hard for real changes that would protect both officers and civilians. Jordan clicked to her recommendation slide, the same one she'd shown the mayor but refined based on 4 months of implementation. These aren't theoretical suggestions, she said. These are practical procedures that my department has been using for 4 months, and the results speak for themselves. She showed the statistics. 0 wrong address raids since implementation. Average warrant execution time increased by 12 minutes, but accuracy rate increased to 100%. Community complaints decreased by 40%. Officer confidence in their warrants increased significantly. 12 extra minutes, Jordan emphasized. That's all it takes. 12 minutes to verify an address through multiple sources, to confirm you have the right location, to make sure you're not about to traumatize an innocent family, or let a guilty suspect escape because you're busy at the wrong address. She walked to the edge of the stage, closer to the audience. Some of you are thinking this sounds good in theory but won't work in practice, that your department is different, that your cases are more urgent, that you don't have time for extra verification steps. She looked directly at the skeptical faces. I get it, I do. But let me ask you something. How much time does it take to deal with a wrong address raid? To apologize to a traumatized family? To process the complaints? To handle the media attention? To defend against lawsuits? To rebuild community trust? She let that sink in. A wrong address raid can destroy weeks or months of community relationship building in a single morning. It can undermine public trust in your entire department. It can end careers. It can change lives. Is that really worth saving 12 minutes? Jordan spent the next hour walking through specific implementation strategies. How to build verification into existing workflows. How to get buy-in from resistant officers. How to train supervisors to properly review warrants. How to create accountability without creating fear. She shared case studies from her department. Warrants that were delayed because verification revealed problems. Addresses that turned out to be wrong. Suspects who'd moved months earlier. Simple checks that prevented disasters. Here's my favorite success story, Jordan said, clicking to a new slide. 3 weeks after we implemented the new procedures, an officer was preparing to execute a warrant. The verification process revealed that the apartment number was wrong. Not because anyone made a mistake, but because the informant had given information from 6 months earlier, and the suspect had moved to a different unit. She smiled at the audience. That officer's name? Rodriguez, the same officer who raided my apartment. He followed the new procedures. He caught the error. He verified the correct apartment, and he executed the warrant without traumatizing a single innocent person. The audience broke into spontaneous applause. Rodriguez, in the third row, looked embarrassed but proud. Jordan's expression turned serious again. But implementation isn't enough. We need cultural change. We need departments where officers feel safe questioning bad information, where supervisors support thorough preparation over speed, where speaking up about problems is rewarded, not punished. She told the story of Detective Williams, not naming him directly, but describing the pattern of negligence, the retaliation against officers who questioned him, the system that protected him because he got results. One detective, 23 wrong address raids over 5 years. How did this happen? Because the culture valued arrests over accuracy. Because questioning a senior detective was seen as disrespectful. Because nobody wanted to slow down the workflow with inconvenient questions. Jordan's voice grew stronger. That culture has to change. And it starts with each of you. You supervisors support your officers when they raise concerns. You trainers teach the importance of verification, not just the mechanics of execution. You line officers have the courage to speak up when something doesn't feel right. She clicked to her final slide. A simple question. What kind of department do you want to work for? Do you want to work for a department that covers up mistakes? Jordan asked.